let me start maybe with something that I have become aware too, and my colleagues, Impressionism, you know, something that is kind of well accepted and even conservative in a way. What makes it a revolutionary movement, you know, Impressionism, from our days, seen from our days?
There is a sort of deliberate lightness and an engagement with the charm of nature and the immediate glory of the natural scene. You know, and the very word impressionism, means that you are steering towards the immediate and the immediately available. But of course, in a way that's paradoxical, because artists like Monet and Pissarro, and certainly like Pissarro, they were deeply serious. I mean, Pissarro had a definite puritanical streak, and he absolutely believed that the way to continuing greatness in art, and he wanted to make great art, was to set aside the big narratives, the big ambitions, the engagement with history, and somehow or other trust absolutely to nothing but the moment one senses the truth of the scene in front of you, and try to forget everything you knew and had been taught about what the world is and how we're located in it. And out of that will come a kind of painting which has some perplexing, peculiar, paradoxical depth to it, really. That would be my, my defense of Impressionist superficiality. That superficiality probably is our way through to knowing what's happening to us.
Impressionism has been carved out of the history of modernism. It's interesting that when Roger Fry does an exhibition in 1910 in London, great, massive, incredible exhibition, he selects completely arbitrarily, and I would say anti-historically, Manet and the post-impressionists. And the impressionists are left out. It's too sweet, too lovely, too charming, too delightful. That's not serious. But I therefore joined here team 100%. There is behind that superficiality, or there is perhaps with that superficiality, a sense of depth, multi-layeredness, complexities.
I guess it's maybe hard for us, and especially if we are not experts, maybe even more so, to understand that this way of painting, this kind of, deliberate sketchiness or the speed with which the color is applied is something we don't understand. What a revolution and what an outraging kind of new way of seeing the world it was for the public in the 19th century.
Yes, it certainly was. And in a way, of course, that's quite interesting and perplexing, because there had been 30, 40 years previous to Impressionism, the great age of Corot and the school of Barbizon and d'Aubigny, which the public had become accustomed to sketchiness in art. But of course, Impressionism is different from sketchy. You actually look at a Pissarro and you say, this is not a sketch for anything. This is an entirely deliberate and fierce putting down of exactly the nature of the scene in front. So I think it was that combination of approximation with the feeling that actually the approximate is the truth and has to be sort of seized on fiercely. What is finish anyway, right? That you see, the sketchers accept that there's the sketch and there's the finished work. The Impressionists say, what is a finished work? What is finish? how does a painting come to the end? I mean, it's actually agony for them to decide when a painting comes to the end. Pissarro talks about that, as you know, right? And sometimes his painting can get deeply in trouble because he doesn't know when to stop. But not knowing when to stop is fundamental, and must have been very bewildering to that first audience.
Maybe it would be interesting to talk or to hear from you, creativity. I mean, obviously that's a very personal, intimate, always been an extremely intimate, personal act, but there is a very important collaborative, and maybe not collective, but there is an element of finding that, and that was, of course, one of the show's goals, to find out more about that.
Yes. Well, of course, it's the wonderful moments in the show where you have a Cézanne hung next to a Pissarro. For instance, the grand salon, the grand exhibition picture that Pissarro does in 1877 for the third Impressionist exhibition, the Côte de Boeuf, and then next to it a much smaller, well, sort of half-size Cézanne of roughly the same motif, probably begun at the same moment under Pissarro's spell, I think retouched and rethought perhaps some years later. But this dynamic happens all the way through Pissarro's career. Pissarro is a man who thinks we're inventing a new set of terms and criteria and means of judgment for what counts as major painting. We can't do it on our own. It has to be done through working with others. It has to be done by also explicitly working out our new project. There's a wonderful reminiscence of Lucien Pissarro, Pissarro's beloved eldest son, who was 11, 12 at the time that Cézanne and Pissarro were working together near Pontoise. And he says many lovely things about, he certainly says that they sat down side by side and painted the same motif. He also says that Cézanne just lay on the grass for hours on end and watched Pissarro paint. And he also says they discussed theories endlessly. So it was practice, but it was also theory, discussion, discourse. What are we doing? Because we're reinventing the language of art.
I was thinking about the structure of that exhibition that you did, curator. It's almost like a facade, like a star with many different branches, and you can take one branch and you would get another exhibition. You have a Gauguin Pissarro exhibition, an incredible room. You have, yes, as Tim mentioned, Cézanne Pissarro exhibition, Monet Pissarro, and so on throughout the progression of the exhibition. It's absolutely fascinating and endless. I would say briefly, to me, this plurality can be argued or maybe articulated on two levels. If we go back to this moment, which I believe was extremely important, that moment of a break with history, you need to be you need to be together. You look at a strike in the street or a demonstration, you need the power of several individuals is the force. And these guys needed to be together in order to combat. I think there was a combative element against the conservative forces of the 19th century in France. But then that itself is inherently re-interiorized by each of these individuals who work together, Cézanne Pissarro, a perfect example, and exchange the medium that modernism is about, which is one's ego, one's sensations, one's own impressions. And how do you, and that's the real fundamental paradox I still cannot completely wrap myself around, how do you exchange yourself with someone else?
Maybe that brings us to the topic of anarchism, because that links many of these people. Obviously, Pissarro, well-read and very open-minded and a real intellectual in a way among the the artists, first generation especially. Then these younger, the neo-impressionists, almost all of them very interested and very sympathetic to anarchism. You know, I think again, anarchism is kind of a misunderstood phenomenon, no? Because anarchism in the 19th century, it wasn't, you know, it has nothing to do with terrorism, which many people kind of associated with. Anarchism was a form of kind of humanism, no? Utopian belief in a better society with peaceful means, achieved with peaceful means. Maybe we can talk about that, because of course it has to do with this notion of getting something new done by experimenting together and thinking together.
Yes. And Pissarro is indeed, you know, very, very seriously and deeply committed to a form of anarchism. It shifts what this means from year to year and decade to decade. He can't be separated from violence, from political violence. He certainly was not a violent man, but he had complex reactions to propaganda by the deed, right? You know, physical, violent attack on bourgeois institutions. But of course, more pervasively and profoundly, anarchism for him. Remember that the title of one of the early anarchist newspapers was Journal de l'Ordre, and l'Anarchie, Journal de l'Ordre. And anarchists believed that anarchy was a new form of ordering social relations and collectivities of human beings, that the nation state had proved itself bankrupt, bloodthirsty. As one later anarchist put it, war is the health of the state. So how can we possibly envisage a society without war? How would a society without war be organized? So these ideas are absolutely fundamental for him. And he's always looking for a moment when a group of fellow practitioners have enough in common that they can work together, work on each other's way of working, and as it were, provide a kind of model, an epitome, a sort of foretaste of what anarchist organization might be like. That's the appeal to him, an elated moment for him, really, when he thinks in the later 1880s that in and around Seurat and Signac, he'd found a new style and a new way of interacting with others.
A pictorial order, a new pictorial order.
A new pictorial order and a new social order, really. You know, a new kind of artistic comradeship. That's always. But of course, Joachim is also right to sound the warning note, because almost as soon as he adopts the dot, the Seurat dot, the pointilliste technique, almost as soon as he adopts it, he's saying to his son, I'm not sure this is for me, you know. Is this my sensation? Am I sabotaging my own real way of looking and painting? So there will always be this tremendous tension, which I suppose is the anarchist tension, right, between order, collectivity, and individuality, right? But art may be a way of solving it.
You mentioned the word humanism in link with anarchism. I think that's spot on. Tim and I were actually talking last night about a topic that is equally, I mean, even more huge, which is the relationship between anarchism and Marxism, which is absolutely fundamental to the context, more precisely between Marx and Bakunin around the creation of the Second International. So that's a topic, let's leave that aside for now. But what I think is one of the most important distinction between the two is that the anarchists reproach the Marxists to continue to put an emphasis, more than an emphasis, to lean entirely their vision, the political, social, economic system on the creation of a state, the so-called dictatorship of the proletariat. That's a state. For the anarchist, there is no such thing. And it's interesting to ask yourself today, could there be an actual, real political system on this planet that would resemble an anarchist society? And I think the answer is, I'm sure you will all agree, right here under our feet, Switzerland, with the notion of direct democracy, touches almost closely, because anarchism gets the bad rap, but it's, in fact, you've just heard it from these two gentlemen here, it is not the idea of debauched, complete, do everything you want, and so on, absolutely not. In fact, the anarchists are leaning upon themselves to create a sense of self-order, self-mechanism. And there's nobody more disciplinarian towards himself than Pissarro and all the anarchists. They're really very tough guys towards themselves. That's how the order continues to be maintained by this self-rule, this self-ruling autonomy, and this is what it means in Greek. You apply the rule to yourself.
So can you maybe say something about this notion of, it's another hierarchy that, of course, the anarchists would be against anyway, but there's, of course, the best, or the best known and the most successful Impressionist, and there's Pissarro, and he's in this strange position and underknown in many ways, as I believe this exhibition shows. Yeah.
So Tim Clark here, definitely, this is a bit of a dance, has absolutely undeniably, in my eye, contributed to redress this unbalance. But I will say, so I'm glad you brought up this notion of anarchism, because I do feel great empathy with a lot of what the anarchists are saying, and the question of who is the better, the leader, and so on. Let's look at ourselves as a circle around here, and who is first in the circle? Where does the circle begin? The circle is made of this plurality of different individuals. You take one out, the circle is smaller and less powerful than it was. To me, and I think it's interesting, this is perhaps the only, because we agree on so many things, it's getting a little boring sometimes, so let's throw in a little grain of dissension in this absolutely masterful, gorgeous latest essay with two different versions, the one in the London Review of Books by Timothy Clark and the one that you can read in a catalogue. Tim sort of redresses the unbalance, but at the same time feeling probably the weight of history, the weight of artistry on his shoulders more than I do. I'm a little bit of a rebel. Tim says, well, of course, I'm not going to say that Cézanne was not the greatest. So this little concession, that small concession that Tim gives to the weight of history, I personally would have thought was not entirely necessary. But this is not to say that I think that Pissarro is the greater. This is only to say that I don't really care about the question, personally.
Yeah. I understand. I hope that its real effect on art history would be to say, it's even outrageous to make the comparison, but that's another story. I think the answer to this question is that Pissarro will never shake off the status of second to Monet, second to Degas. He'll never, because he's a different kind of artist, because his art does not depend on mastery. Right? We disapprove of the word, but we are very far from ridding ourselves of the set of reflexes. What we go to art for is the evidence of absolute complete command. Pissarro doesn't believe in complete command. He believes that a painting is a way of feeling your way towards a new appraisal of your place in nature and in society, by the way, because his nature is a worked nature, populated by a kind of human being, male and female, who've worked this nature through eons according to set routines and innovations and understandings. So every time a painting is an opening up to this extraordinarily strange reality we live in, this worked world and the people who work it. And there's no one way of commanding that. I don't want to command it. I want to expose myself to its difficulties, its beauties, its imperfections, its strangeness, its remoteness from me, the things about it I don't understand. This is what art is for. And it's, of course, he's very far from being the only artist who adopts that attitude to artistic understanding. But I think he's an extreme case of artistic humility.
Cézanne sees exactly the same thing with Pissarro, but adds another epithet, humble and colossal, in relationship to anarchism, by the way. This is Tim knows exactly the quote by heart. He was quoting it yesterday, so I don't remember exactly.
No, it's a wonderful quote, and it testimony to how deeply Cézanne thought about Pissarro and how much Pissarro lived on in his thinking and working. He says, towards the very end of his life, and he's writing to Bernard, who the previous month had written an article with some rather, banal dismissals of anarchism. Oh, these artists that think they're anarchists, how pathetic. And Cézanne is quietly outraged. And he writes to Bernard about many things, but then at the end he says, well, maybe la théorie modifie, l'étude, deep study, l'étude modifie notre vision à un tel degré que l'humble et colossal Pissarro se trouve justifié dans ses théories anarchistes. It's, it's a very meditated put down of Bernard and a very meditated reflection on what Pissarro was. He was humble, but he was also colossal, and the intensity was in the humility, really. It's an extraordinary, we take for granted those two adjectives, but it's typical Cézanne thinking. It's deep thinking, really. Towards the beginning, look at that wall, which is opposite the Cézanne portrait, of the four paintings, 3 by Pissarro and 1 by Cézanne. Quite a series of slightly dark pictures, the quarry, the Cézanne, the Mannheim picture of the pool, the river and the bridge, and then at the end this exquisite picture from Lugano of houses nestling under the ridge of the Hermitage. Look at the 4 and think about Pissarro's range, that the kind of gravity and palette knife decisiveness of the quarry picture can coexist with something as delicate as the Lugano picture at the other end of the four. And look at the fact that Pissarro is a painter. He loves painting. He's capable, he's fully capable of showmanship in painting when he thinks he can manage it, when he can integrate his showmanship into the whole painted array. So there, right at the end, you can see him, 2 chimney pots, 1 pink, 1 yellow. I'm sure they weren't 1 pink and 1 yellow. He's inventing. So avoid the notion that he's always humble.
So my parting shot, but I would almost use the same words as Tim, but looking at a completely different wall, which is at the very end, and you yourself were mildly proud and justifiably so for having gathered those 3 views of the Boulevard Montmartre, one of my favorites, and the 3 that you gathered couldn't be further apart in terms of audacity, decision, power, compositional. You know, one is a beautiful, slightly bucolic, if the term applies to Paris, but sort of spring-like version of the Boulevard Montmartre with the trees budding and this gentle touches of green at the tips of the branches. Beautiful, very strangely beautiful painting for Pissarro. Then the other 2 are crazy. One, a night scene, which Boulevard Montmartre during the night, which is, I think, perhaps a clin d'oeil, a sort of gentle salute to the earliest moment of Impressionism, when his frenemy, maybe rival and friend, as we mentioned, Monet creates the great Impression sunrise, which we all know, but next to that painting was a painting of the port of Le Havre during the night. And I think this never, Monet is never far from his mind. It's another kind of contradiction in terms, looking at depicting the reality during the night. It's a fascinating painting. And the third one to the very right is the Winter Third painting, I think. Is it in Winter Tour? Yeah. Is the one where you see the Boulevard Montmartre swollen with a crowd. The crowd, of course, for an anarchist is not an incidental element, but is probably nothing more than just a crowd of people celebrating a Mardi Gras or something like this. But it's the range of these 3 paintings show exactly what Tim was discussing about this earlier wall, the Cézanne and the Pissarros, and the extraordinary, just sheer bravura or gamut of possibilities that he afforded himself. Successfully or less successfully is a different question, but really...
The Mardi Gras full of streamers, yep, exactly. Right? Sort of multicolored streamers. The idea of Pissarro being delighted in that kind of subject, but he was. Yeah.